does this create a false sense of the relative importance of rich and poor countries and regions? And does Africa get shortchanged? Well, we'll look at this map now that has been created to basically correct what you and I grew up learning, that is Africa is a relatively small continent. Well, it isn't. This means that Africa has the most natural resources, including land for agriculture, mines for almost every conceivable mineral. Now, these, including her human resources, have played a central role in the evolution of capitalism from its mercantile origins to the current global finance dominance, all to the advantage of the West and the disadvantage of the people of Africa. These are points to ponder on, and I'll be discussing that shortly with my panelists on Checkpoint. Now, this week, the eyes of the world have been on Africa and the 50 years of independence from colonial rule. But a new battlefield has emerged, and that is on the question of the ICC. Uganda has successfully rallied all but one African state to support a resolution that wants the ICC to hand over the Kenya cases to a local court, or else all African countries will withdraw from that Rome Statute. Now listen to Zambia's President Michael Satta's opposition to the ICC on the sidelines of the AU summit in Addis Ababa. And while the heads of state had a closed-door meeting to discuss the same, this is what he had to say.
Please. And it is time we Africans, all of you Africans, came in charge of your own affairs. Right. We are not going to court in London. We are not going to court in Hague. They were taking us to local courts in our own countries. Why should we be going somewhere else?
What would be your proposal in dealing with matters of justice in relation
to if when you are talking of justice, you're the Kenyan people, if during the struggle or during the elections you killed each other, bring the people who killed you to book. That's what we do in Zambia.
Thank you.
Yeah, newly sworn in Foreign Secretary Amina Abdallah tried to deal with the same issue, downplaying the matter. Listen to her.
That is prepared on the ICC, its relationship with Africa, status of cases that are before it that touch on the continent or on Africans, and basically that's what it's about. We haven't had a discussion yet. We're going to have that discussion today.
Well, joining me now in studio to discuss this and more, our resident political analyst, Professor Edward Kisiangani, who is seated to my far right. In the middle, IEA Institute of Economic Affairs CEO Kwame Owino, thank you so much for coming in, and strategist Moses Kuria. Gentlemen, good evening to you all. It has certainly been an interesting couple of days as the eyes of the world were in Africa. But Prof, let me begin with you on the ICC question, and how far has it served to better or disenfranchise the continent, especially on the question of justice?
I think there are two things, Anne, which you should know. And this is about the question of being fooled. If you want to be fooled, there are two ways to be fooled. The first thing is to believe what isn't true, and to completely refuse to accept what is true. If you look at what has happened in Addis Ababa, it is about 54 people representing different countries of the African continent with their delegations, talking about the old story of bashing the West and saying that the West is the cause of their problems. And therefore thinking that once we bash the West, bash the ICC, there will be justice. We have completely missed the point. The debate that should be there is this. If governments in Africa fear people, then there will be liberty and development. But if the people fear their governments, there will be tyranny. And this tyranny creates underdevelopment, poverty, and all the problems we have had in Africa. So today we are being told about the ICC process and the justice system. How many justice systems in Africa are capable of prosecuting a sitting president, including ours here? There is none. And when the president of Zambia tells you that go back to the courts, how many can they? In this country, just the other day when we wanted people to make a ruling, the judicial system here to make a ruling over whether ICC suspects can stand for elections or not, they developed cold feet. So why would they now be given these cases to prosecute? So my position is very clear in this matter, that the ICC process is not a problem. And the truth, the lie that is being told in Addis Ababa, tell no lies, claim no quick victories. That should be our philosophy. The reason why they are saying that is that they want to discontinue the cases and justify impunity in the African continent and say things are okay. But Anne, you have also to notice this. Nobody has forced the ICC on Africa. In our case in Kenya, the lie is that ICC is imposing on us. The West is imposing us. We invited the ICC to come to Kenya after the parliamentary process failed to put up a local tribunal. Nobody's talking about that truth. So why would you now get back and say the ICC is the problem, the West is the problem? It's the old theme. In 1963, it is now, and it has resulted into the suffering of the African people. If you really think that the African leaders are doing very well, and they think that things are moving very well, the current situation in Uganda, where the media is being bashed, if you look at the DJRC report that we have just received now, it tells a sad story of Africa. We need people who can provide good governance and the development, and poverty levels reduced. This has not happened.
Let me bring in Moses into this conversation. Moses, where's the balance in the new wave of Pan-Africanism between sovereignty and justice?
You know, and there's a reason that the Western justice systems developed. And that reason is because there was no ICC. That reason is because there was no option, there was no alternative. Because every time that we think that the alternative to building a home-based judicial systems is to go to the ICC, then we miss the point. Because when are we, you know, for a whole professor to say, to put all the African justice jurisdictions.
This professor,
this one here. Okay. And throw it to the sea is really unfortunate, even for me. Because, you know, you're saying that from Cape to Cairo, yeah, from Mogadishu all the way to Cape Verde, that we don't have, you know, proper justice systems in Africa. And let me tell you something, that we are not the only continent with teething problems, for example. The other day, you know, we had the issue in Gaza, for example, where a humanitarian, convoy was attacked by Israel. That matter has been referred to the ICC, and I can promise you it will not see the end of the day. We've got a very burning situation in Syria, and that is not a matter within the purview of the ICC. We've got lots of problems even within the Balkans and within, you know, other parts of Europe. We've had problems in Mexico. All those don't get to the ICC. Why is it? And how is it that only in Africa, that instead of, you know, you look at a country like Kenya, where we have actually a new constitution, where we have got a reformed judiciary, do we want God to come from up there so that we know we have good justice in Africa?
Go back to 1963. This is 50 years. 50 years of impunity, 50 years of detention without trial, 50 years of Museveni spraying his own political opponents with a form made up of pepper, pili-pili, 50 years of assassinations, 50 years of land grabbing. ICC was not there. It's a recent thing. And it came because there was genocide in Rwanda. You and me watched as Rwanda was burning. 1 million people, 1 million skulls in Rwanda. And if the international community asks, you say this is sovereignty. Where is the sovereignty we are talking about?
Why is the ICC not based in Africa? Because you talked about Uganda. Yeah, you talk about all the other countries. Assume for one crazy moment that you are right. Then do we want to say that we have got this court whose only clients are African? Just imagine the laws even in terms of air tickets. Because all the 50 countries in Africa are the primary shareholders of ICC according to, you know, to the cases before them, then why can't we have it here in Africa even?
Moses, very good question, but let me bring in Kwame into this question, because the question, as we've just seen, I think a couple of minutes ago in our top story, the fact that the ICC heads of state, the AU heads of state have resolved that they will pull out of the ICC if these cases are not brought back home. What has its impact been in doing business in Kenya? And do we have anything to draw on that says, should this happen, should Kenya not participate, that we're going to suffer significantly when it comes to trade?
Okay, let me just start by making reference to your leading story about the AU. The ICC question is a momentous question for we in Kenya, and obviously the debate by these two gentlemen tells you that there's a lot to be discussed, including separating truth from our very passionate feelings. I think we need to do that, and perhaps the media could help with that. But I'd have thought that celebrating 50 years after the formation of the AU, in terms of a track record of what the AU has achieved, sitting here and leaving the ICC question aside, the AU and its predecessor, the OAU, is actually a qualified failure.
Modern League of Nations.
Pardon?
Our modern League of Nations?
Well, I'm talking about that because, let me speak as an African. The League of Nations is a totally different matter. And if you ask me, even comparing one against the other, Africans are poorer than they were 50 years ago before the AU was formed. Many more countries are even more unstable. And African countries, this is more important because it's part of bringing some kind of respect for brotherhood and the unity that Africa proposes. Most African countries have failed to build inclusive societies, which is the perfect responsibility of the presidents and all those leaders, however they got to their presidency. I mean, some of them shot their way, some of them have killed opponents, and some of them, of course, were elected through democratic means. So it's a really, really mixed bag. And if you look at it, then the average African is none the better because the AU exists. So if the AU did not exist, I don't think there'd be any African mourning for it, with the exception of politicians. That's a very sad story, in my view. So when they talk about 50 years, I am a little concerned that we've perfectly talked about the political platform. And when the AU was formed, its founding fathers, many of whom as well did not have very clean records, and now we're actually glossing over their records, that concerns me. So the average African is much worse than they were when the colonialists left. I think the average African education for all Africans is still less than 10 years of education.
Prof.
I think you need my assistant. That's perfect. It's a terrific argument. I haven't seen that since the beginning of the year, anything like that. You are doing very well. Look, the African summit is full of people who do 9 things wrong and only one thing right. And that one thing right is talking about sovereignty. And then use the one thing right to justify murder, to justify messing of democratic processes, to justify detention, and to justify poverty. And say people are okay. Nobody wants to talk about it. When they tell us that, look, let us bring the cases back home, they are telling us, let us terminate the cases. That is a euphemism for termination of cases, and other people can still murdering others. And, look at the person who proposes the thing about ICC, Yoweri Museveni. This guy, if I had capacity, he shouldn't be commenting on Kenyan matters. He shouldn't even speak anything about Kenya, because Kenya has advanced slightly more than he has done. And he's the one proposing this. He knows very well that what he did to Besigye can take him to the ICC. He knows very well. Right now he has reshuffled the army. And he's telling people, that look, it's a normal practice. But the guy is practicing nepotism. The founding fathers, even the charter of OAU in 1963, didn't talk about nepotism. It wanted unity. You can't talk nepotism where you promote your son very quickly in the army and force his way. I mean, and then change the constitution and become a life president.
Let me interject there. I think the question of Uganda is one that is obvious, is not lost on any of us. But Moses, very quickly, what do you think of what Kwame has talked about, that no one would miss the AU? Has it surely done nothing?
I think that Africa needs to be given a chance, and I think that we have. It is nothing to be gainsaid that we have got our fair share of problems in Africa, but we are evolving, and I do believe in Africa. And if you look at, even from the point of view of resources, for example, that the amount, for example, for oil, you look at Madagascar, you look at Mozambique, you look at Equatorial Guinea, all the countries that are discovering oil. Africa is going to be a very important place, and we have got 2 options. We can look at it from the point of view of negativity, or we can contribute constructively, to building a good African story, to continue democratizing. Remember that if this meeting was held 20 years ago, half of the leaders would be military dictators, would have come through the coups and such kind of thing. Today, except Mali, for example, we don't have any other country which has not gone through regular democratic elections. So what's all this negativity about?
No, but Moses, just listen about one thing. Just an interjection. You are talking about resources in Africa. Who is selling the African resources like oil? I was in Lagos one time. The oil wells of Lagos of Nigeria are very near Lagos. There was no fuel in the pump station. Who is selling that oil? Is it the African people, or it is the African president?
Who voted for them?
The uranium
Good luck, Jonathan, faced all the 80 million people of Nigeria, and they voted for him president. You are not elected.
Okay, let me
please.
Let me interject.
No.
I think certain
Kwame, please.
Before the independence of African nations and before the OAU preceded the AU, this there's a lot of talking down at Africa, and even names about Africa, about it being the black continent. The dark continent, sorry. I don't fly private jets, but once in a while I fly across this continent, and at night this continent is dark. Now, whether we want to blame somebody else for it or not is a different matter. Africa has a big, if you call it one, we have a big development problem. And that is not going to be solved by sharp political rhetoric blaming Britain. It will not.
What
And that's
will
why
solve
it's
it?
disappointing. Pardon?
As you conclude, what will solve it?
Most of the things that are required to solve Africa's problems, unfortunately, are in the public domain. You build inclusive societies, you respect elections, and most importantly, respect life. Without those, it does not matter what political rhetoric we say. 100 years, 50 years from today, we'll probably be saying the same thing.
I'm sorry, Moses,
do you
I'm
believe
told
that
I
Africa
must
is a
wind
dark
up.
continent?
Do you think
Africa is a dark continent?
In the literal sense, yes.
You do believe Africa is a dark continent?
In the literal
And you do
sense,
believe that there's no hope for Africa?
Gentlemen, I thank you for your heated and passionate views. This really is the kind of conversation that we need to have more often as to what is ailing our continent and how do we fix it more importantly. I truly want to appreciate the passion with which you've articulated yourselves tonight. Professor Edward Kisiangani, to my right, Kwame Owino, CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Moses Kuria. Gentlemen, I thank you. I'm sorry, time is up. Look, they're friends now, shaking hands. We take a short break. I'll be back with the sports next.